couldn't resist thinking there's snow business like snow business in Paris at the moment. But if you're in Lyon, where it's obviously much warmer because it's closer to the equator, etc., well, it is.
That's definitely my experience of living there.
Of course. But things are pretty hot there at the moment, though, having said that. Do you want to explain this to us, JJ? Lyon, a huge team, of course, in Ligue, have been handed a provisional relegation to Ligue 2. What is a provisional relegation? What's going on there?
Okay, so I think the best place to start, and it's normally only sort of in the build-up to the January transfer window and the summer transfer window that sort of non-French speakers will hear about this phenomenal thing called the DNCG, which is essentially the French football financial watchdog. Now, clubs have to go in front of the DNCG twice per year, once before the season starts and once at the midpoint of the season, in order to present their budgets, one, to show sort of what they expect the financial future to look like, and one to prove that they're on course to meet the estimates that they'd given in the summer. Now, Lyon had their meeting with the DNCG recently. We've known that Lyon have had financial issues for some time, and the outcome of that DNCG meeting, despite John Textor, the American owner there, saying, the meeting went very well, a couple of hours later they came out and delivered the verdict that there was going to be a provisional relegation to Ligue at the end of the season. There's essentially a 100 million gap in essentially what was budgeted and agreed upon in the summer and was passed, which obviously allowed Lyon to compete this season. And then Textor held an impromptu press conference the following day to address the major issues that are now facing Lyon, because not only are they facing this provisional relegation to Ligue 2 in the summer, they also now have a transfer ban in place and their salary bill is being supervised. So essentially they can't bring anyone else in and they can't even renew contracts to add to the wage bill. Bottom line, and Textor, didn't really, is quite thinly veiled in his press conference. You're essentially looking at selling 6 or 7 players and trying to create as much money as possible while remaining as competitive as possible. Lyon are in the shake-up for a European position at this moment in time. But based on what Textor said, there's a lot of sort of conspiracy theory conjecture flying around out there, him saying he's got a lot of enemies in the DNCG and sort of the top brass of some of the top clubs in France, notably PSG as well, where quite often he'll come out and speak in very derogatory terms about PSG's Qatari ownership. And part of Textor's plan was essentially talking publicly about selling his minority stake in Crystal Palace and then potentially putting that money into his Igor Football Holdings group, which includes the likes of Botafogo in Brazil, Molenbeek as well in Belgium, and using that money to improve Lyon's financial position. Obviously, it's not been helped by the French financial position of professional clubs at this moment in time with the deteriorated TV rights monies, but Lyon's bottom line financial situation, and it's a bit more transparent with Lyon than many other clubs because they're publicly listed and quite a rarity in that respect. Also the fact that they own their stadium. For how much longer, we'll have to wait and see. But essentially, Lyon now have debts going in excess of 500 million. So even if they do manage to get themselves out of this hole, you would imagine that they would be able to, because there are different sort of ways that they could happen, whether that's one of John Textor's backers stepping in and potentially taking control of the club from him, whether that's other assets like the stadium sort of being sold off. The women's team has already been sold off, for example. We'll have to wait and see what the ultimate solution is. But the bottom line is that a lot of players will probably be available this summer. There's been planned transfers such as Thiago Almada coming from Botafogo, which obviously now is not going to be able to happen, which seems to throw a bit of a spanner in the works for him, considering that he left Atlanta United expecting to go to Lyon and is now probably stuck for the foreseeable future in Brazil. And it's just a very messy situation. Lyon's wage bill, whether it's players, whether it's staff, is massively bloated compared to sort of the level that the club is at this moment in time. And, when people say, how serious is it really when we're talking about potentially seeing Lyon drop into Ligue 2? You've got Bordeaux in the fourth tier of French football, semi-professional French football. They lost their professional status, and Saint Etienne probably were going a similar way until the Kilmer Sports Ventures take over this summer. So there is a very real threat to Lyon going down into the second tier of French football, and if they do, you just have to look at the struggles that other clubs that have come down from the top flight in the last couple of years, Sochaux, for example, Nancy as well, smaller clubs, sure, but clubs that really, really struggle to, come to terms with the new financial reality. Clubs that also bring through a lot of young talent, and Lyon, has been a leader in that field for a long, long time. So you've got Textor coming out and saying a lot of these things publicly, avoiding as well, a very awkward press conference like he did a couple of months ago, where he said one figure and then, somebody basically, asks a different question and points out that the figures aren't exactly the ones that he said. So looked very, very clumsy. And that's why he, kept a bit more of a lid on this press conference. But what he said during this presser, I don't think will have filled Lyon fans with confidence for the future that he's the right man to turn this situation around, especially while he seems so obsessed with this idea of trying to acquire a Premier League club as well.
Well, there's a lot hanging over Lyon then, this provisional relegation position. How will it go down? Not too well, I can imagine, if they do get relegated. Do you believe they will? Because from what?
No, I don't think they will.
Okay.
I don't think they will. I think there's too much riding on it. They're a bigger institution financially than any of those other clubs mentioned. Yeah, Bordeaux, who of course are historically a very big club. I think the tempting thing to do can be to draw the parallel between Lyon and Bordeaux, because Bordeaux are also part of a multi-club model. And you look at the other clubs that Gerard Lopez has been in charge of. Fortunately, Lille just about got out from under him. But you look at Boavista in Portugal; they're on the brink of going to the wall. Already happened to Mouscron in Belgium. So he's got a terrible record, and he's someone who should clearly not be in football. Now it's slightly different with Textor because he has healthy parts of other bits of the Eagle Football Group. So Botafogo are doing quite well. At what cost, you might argue. But I think you look at this, and the biggest problem is not whether Lyon could get out of this as a club. That clearly can be done. There's the resource to do that. Now, I think the debt number's actually not that important. As long as you can service a debt in any football club, is fine, really. And they do have the stadium. But I think the issue here is Textor himself, because he came out of this press conference, as JJ was saying last Saturday, and said, well, the DNCG doesn't understand the multi-club model, doesn't understand the New York Stock Exchange, because we're going to float on the New York Stock Exchange. It's like, it's not their job to, is it? It's not their job to understand that. Their job is to make sure, on quite strict terms, and stricter than a lot of other European countries, so it is different here than it is in the Premier League or Serie A or whatever, to make sure that clubs can get through the season. What needs to happen here is for him to satisfy them. What he thinks about the model, he's not saying we haven't breached the rules. He's saying, I don't agree with the rules. Well, he's not going to change them, is he? So really, there has to be someone who can get through to him to make him understand that you're going to have to step in line. And if you're not going to step in line, well, maybe running a club in France isn't for you. Now, of course, because so much of the money that he uses is lent to him by financial institutions, a similar thing could actually happen to what happened with Milan, for example, where basically the major creditors end up owning the club. That's always a possibility. But in the short term, there just needs to be a bit of a reality check, because this has been coming for a while. And obviously the DNCG has discretionary powers as well, but he has done nothing to curry their favour, because he has basically ridiculed their very existence in public. He's lied to them because he said last summer, okay, we're going to sell 100 million euros worth of players. They've not. They sold just under 40 million euros worth of players. So why would they believe anything he says about, I'm going to give you this money, where I'm going to put money in when I've sold my parts of Crystal Palace? I'm going to get money from elsewhere in the Eagle Group. We've got to complete on selling other assets. And by the way, I think this is something for a while now. It's concerned me for a while now. It should have worried Lyon fans long ago. If you go back to this point last year when the team was absolutely terrible, that wasn't really the main problem. The main problem was that he was selling off other bits, other assets, like, as JJ said, the very successful women's team, like the LDLC Arena, which is the top of the range basketball stadium and concert hall that sits dead opposite the Groupama Stadium. So it's all about cash flow. That's how Textor runs his businesses. And you know what? I wouldn't just be worried as a Lyon fan. I'd be worried if I was a Botafogo fan as well.
What about if you're a Crystal Palace fan?
Well, that doesn't make any difference because he's got no real influence there. And that's why he's found that quite a frustrating experience, because he's owned 40% of Crystal Palace, and at the end of it, Steve Parish gets to call all the shots. So he's been trying to sell that for a while. And that's another reason to not believe in Textor, actually, because when he said this money is coming, well, okay, you've been publicly trying to sell the parts of Crystal Palace for, like, say, 6 months. But the reality is he's been trying to sell them for a lot longer because he's found it a very frustrating experience. But yeah, I think it's clear that he doesn't exactly have his place in French football. The thing is, of course, they need to keep what they're doing on the pitch going, because the only way that they're sustainably going to get out of this sort of situation, well, A, probably with a different owner, but B, by succeeding on the pitch and qualifying for Europe.
And they're not doing badly in that respect, JJ. They are currently 6 games unbeaten. They sit 5th in Ligue 1. And who knows, it might get better before the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are sort of causes for optimism. I think that Pierre Serge has done quite an underrated job as well in his time as Lyon head coach. So I definitely think that he deserves kudos, and there are certain sort of positive aspects. I think maybe one of the worrying things for Lyon and for Lyon fans is that when they have spent money, they've spent money on players who haven't necessarily come in and made the situations positionally any better than they were sort of before they arrived. Mikotadze, for example, was one of the stars of Euro 2024 with Georgia, came in, was in the Lyon Youth Academy when he was much younger, but made his breakthrough with Metz and has sort of returned home. And has had a bit of a difficult time of it, really being as convincing, similar to what he experienced as well with Ajax. And I think that's, been a fairly significant bone of contention, given that, the outlay for him was fairly significant in terms of what Lyon are capable of spending on players. But I do think that they have the squad to be able to be competitive, to be able to finish in one of the European positions, possibly even challenge for silverware with the Coupe de France. Obviously, they were in the final last year as well against PSG before losing out. But I think one of the things that also cost Lyon, and it would have cost Lyon whether Jean-Michel was still in charge or whether it's Textor today, and that's that in terms of their sporting decline since the Champions League run of 2020, they spent 2 years out of Europe, and those 2 years out of European competition, for any club of Lyon's size in any league in Europe, that's going to be very, very detrimental financially. And that was
during
the case.
COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And at a time where France has been between some very, very poor TV rights deals in terms of the money that they were expecting versus the money that they actually got in. And then you've got, lumbered with a bit of debt towards the government as well to help out during the COVID time as well. At which point, France really shot itself in the foot by, ending the league prematurely, whereas a bunch of other leagues waited to see how it would play out and then eventually managed to finish their seasons. So, it was a very particular and complicated context, I think. But, there are reasons to sort of feel optimistic. You look at some of the reorganization that's happening, higher up the club in terms of the hierarchy as well. And things could make a lot more sense in a couple more months. But the bottom line is, in order for this to make sense, there are going to have to be some sales made. And there's not too many players in that Lyon squad, whether it's the players that have come through the academy and traditionally been very attractive to buying clubs, or some of the other players who have come, with the exception maybe of a Malik Fofana, for example, who has done very well since his arrival. There's not too many players that you would really think, okay, Lyon could, turn a bit of a profit on them come January.
I think it's fair to say we'll watch this space or listen to OTC very, very keenly as the weeks go on to find out what happens.